He was known as the Beast of the North, until she placed her hand on his fur and he knelt. The Northlands were a kingdom of ice and shadow, where the sun barely touched the frozen peaks and the wind sang songs of sorrow through the endless forests. Villagers huddled in their small huts, eyes always drawn toward the black towers that loomed over the mountains. It was said that inside those towers lived the Beast of the North, a prince whose heart had been claimed by a curse, whose fury could freeze even the bravest soldier in fear. Aurelia, a healer from the southern valleys, had grown up hearing stories of this beast. Children whispered of his claws, of the way he roared through the forest like a storm. Parents warned that no one who entered his lands ever returned, and yet here she was, clutching a satchel of herbs and a small sacred relic, walking through the snow-laden path that led to his domain. The air was crisp, the kind that stung the cheeks and made the lungs ache, yet Aurelia's steps did not falter. She had come on a mission, not on folly. The king of the southern lands had entrusted her with a task few dared to attempt: deliver a relic to the beast and find a way to break the curse that had bound him for decades. Aurelia was not naive. She understood the danger, but she had seen enough suffering in her life to know that sometimes courage was the only path forward. The forest seemed to close around her, trees bending beneath the weight of snow, their branches scratching at the sky. A silence hung thick in the air, broken only by the occasional crack of ice or the distant howl of some unseen creature. Aurelia's heart pounded, each step echoing against the frozen ground like a drumbeat in the cold. Then she saw him. At first, she thought the villagers' stories had been exaggerations. But as he stepped into the clearing, she knew the tales had barely touched the truth. He was immense, taller than any man she had seen, with shoulders broad and covered in dark fur. His eyes glowed like molten amber, filled with a mixture of fury and sorrow that made the heart ache to witness. A snarl rumbled from deep within his chest as he stared at her, and the snow around him seemed to shiver. Every instinct in her screamed to run, yet something held her in place, a strange magnetic pull she could not name. She had expected terror, but she felt something else, a deep, aching loneliness that mirrored her own. "Who comes to my lands?" The voice was low, gravelly, yet laced with a strange, unexpected vulnerability. I am Aurelia," she replied, her voice trembling only slightly. "I come from the south. I bear a message and a gift." "Ha! I mean no harm. The beast, Kalen, though the name seemed almost distant, lost to time and curse, stepped closer." Each movement was deliberate, careful, yet full of raw strength. His eyes narrowed, studying her as if he could see through her very soul. "I have no need for gifts," he said, "nor for messages." Aurelia swallowed the fear that rose like ice in her throat. "Then I will not linger," she said softly. "But I was told, perhaps I could help you. Help him!" The words felt foolish, almost dangerous, spoken into the teeth of the storm that was Kalen. He growled, a sound that shook the snow from the branches around them. "No one can help me," he said. "No one has ever helped me. Leave now, before I show you why they call me the Beast of the North." She stepped forward, despite the chill that threatened to freeze her resolve. "I have seen sorrow in the eyes of men who were lost," she said. "And sometimes even the smallest touch can remind them who they truly are." Kalen's eyes flickered at that, a brief hesitation, as if her words had touched a place long buried beneath anger and pain. He bared his teeth, more in confusion than threat, and yet he did not move to strike.
Aurelia did the unthinkable.
She reached out, her gloved hand hovering for a moment before she pressed it against his thick fur. The moment her fingers brushed him, the world seemed to shiver. Kalen froze, his massive body rigid, and then slowly, impossibly, he knelt. Aurelia's breath caught. This was no act of submission born of fear. This was something older, something buried deep within him. "A recognition! A memory of a man who had once been noble, who had once believed in kindness. You are not as they said, she whispered, her heart pounding against her ribs. Kalen did not answer. He simply remained on one knee, eyes fixed on hers with a mixture of confusion and longing. His chest rose and fell heavily, his human heartbeat struggling to surface beneath the weight of the beast. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind softened, brushing against the snow as if nature itself watched this fragile moment. "You have been alone for so long," Aurelia said softly. "But that does not mean you must stay in shadows forever." Kalen's hand twitched slightly, the claws that had torn through countless enemies flexing as if restrained by unseen chains. His eyes, molten and wild, softened just a fraction, revealing a depth of sorrow Aurelia could scarcely comprehend. He began, and then stopped. Words had abandoned him long ago, replaced by fury, pain, and a curse that twisted his body and soul alike. Yet Aurelia understood without hearing the rest. She understood that beneath the beast there was still a man, a prince, a soul, someone who had loved and been betrayed, someone who had once been everything the stories said he was not. For a moment there was silence. Only the soft fall of snow, the faint whisper of the wind, and the distant echo of the mountains. Then Kalen slowly rose, towering above her once more. Yet the menace that had radiated from him before seemed tempered, softened by the touch of her hand. "I do not know why, but I do not wish to harm you," he said finally, voice rough but controlled. "Speak your purpose, healer, and be swift." Aurelia pulled a small satchel from her cloak, opening it carefully. Inside were herbs, crystals, and a relic of ancient design. A small orb etched with patterns of frost and sunlight intertwined. "This is for you," she said. "It is said to hold the power to ease curses, to remind hearts of what was lost. I wish to help you find peace." Kalen's eyes narrowed, suspicious, yet curious. "And if this is a trick, it is not a trick," she said firmly. "I have journeyed far, and I have seen what despair does to men and beasts alike. You are neither the villain nor the monster they claim you to be. You are simply trapped." The beast's gaze lingered on the orb, his mind a storm of distrust, longing, and disbelief. He reached out a massive claw, then stopped inches from it. His hand shook slightly, revealing the tremor of a man long unused to gentleness. "Why do you care?" he asked finally, the words barely audible over the wind. Aurelia stepped closer, ignoring the instinct to flee from his raw, towering presence. "Because sometimes," she said softly, "someone must remember the heart behind the beast. And perhaps, because even the coldest lands deserve warmth." For a heartbeat. Kalen said nothing. The wind whistled through the trees, snowflakes dancing like tiny shards of glass. And then he knelt again, this time not in submission, but as if bearing the weight of centuries on his shoulders. Aurelia reached out, placing her hand once more on his fur, feeling the tension, the pain, and the faint pulse of something human beneath. "You have courage," he said finally. "Perhaps more than I possess myself." Aurelia smiled faintly, warmth blooming despite the cold. "Then let us see if courage is enough to face the shadows," she said. The sun dipped low, and the clearing darkened. The first stars appeared, reflected in the icy branches. Aurelia felt a strange mixture of fear and hope, knowing that she had stepped into a world where legends breathed and the line between man and monster was as thin as ice. And yet, she did not step back. She could not, because she had seen the truth behind the beast's eyes. And for the first time, Kalen had seen someone who did not fear the shadow he had become. As night fell, the wind carried a whisper through the forest, like a promise and a warning all at once. The path ahead would not be easy. The beast's heart was as frozen as the Northlands themselves, and yet, for the first time in countless years, a spark of warmth had taken hold. Somewhere deep inside, Kaelin knew the world had changed. And somewhere in her own heart, Aurelia felt it too. But neither knew what dangers lurked in the shadows beyond the trees, waiting for the night to strike. And neither knew how long this fragile connection would last before the curse tried to claim him once more. The beast of the north had knelt before her, but the story was only beginning. And in that moment the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm that would inevitably come. The wind howled through the towers of black ice, rattling the heavy doors of the beast's castle. Aurelia stood before the great gates, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Behind her the snow-covered forest stretched endlessly, but she could not turn back. Not now! Kaelin had allowed her to enter the castle. Not because he trusted easily, trust was a word lost to him, but because something in her presence stirred a long-forgotten part of his heart. Something human. The gates creaked open, revealing a hall of frozen marble and shadows. Light from the low winter sun filtered through frost-streaked windows, scattering prisms across the floor. The air was cold, sharper than the north wind outside, but it carried a sense of strange power. "This way," Kaelin said, his voice echoing in the vast hall. He moved silently, a predator in form, yet careful not to startle her. His fur glistened where the sunlight struck it, and for a moment Aurelia saw him not as a beast, but as the man beneath, the prince who had once smiled, laughed, and loved. The hall opened into a chamber lined with books and relics, many old as the mountains themselves. Frost had crept along the edges of the shelves, but the warmth of the hearth flickered weakly, pushing back the cold. Aurelia's eyes widened. The castle, though intimidating and filled with shadows, was a place of knowledge and history. It spoke of a man who had once ruled with wisdom before the curse had taken him. Kaelin stood by the window, his gaze lost in the white wilderness beyond. "You will sleep here," he said, gesturing toward a small bed. "But do not think that softness means safety." Aurelia nodded, feeling the weight of his warning, but sensing something else, perhaps a flicker of hesitation. He was fierce, yes, and dangerous. But there was restraint, a choice not to harm her. That choice had become a fragile bridge between them. She unpacked her satchel, arranging herbs and crystals on a small table. The relic, a small orb of swirling frost and sunlight, lay at the center. She had yet to understand how it worked, only that it held hope for the cursed prince. Kaelin watched her silently. At times, his presence made her heart pound like a drum. At other times, it brought calm, as if the storm outside the castle walls had a momentary pause within these rooms. "Why do you linger here?" he asked, finally breaking the silence. "Why not leave, like others? Why face me?" Aurelia paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because I believe there is a man beneath the beast, and I believe that no one is beyond saving if they are willing to try." Kaelin's amber eyes softened, but only slightly. "I have tried," he said, "and every attempt has failed. Every bond I have formed has ended in betrayal or death. I am not made for trust." "Then perhaps you need someone who does not demand trust," she replied gently, "but offers it anyway." He laughed softly, a sound that echoed like ice breaking. It was not cruel, it was bitter, tinged with sorrow. "You are brave, healer, or perhaps foolish." Aurelia smiled faintly. "I am both," she said. Over the following days she explored the castle, guided at a distance by Kaelin. Each room held relics, books, and memories. Some were beautiful, tapestries depicting peace and prosperity, rooms filled with laughter frozen in portraits. Others were terrifying, chambers where shadows seemed to move on their own, cursed objects that whispered of sorrow, and corridors that carried faint echoes of screams long past. Aurelia learned that the castle itself was alive with magic. Ice spirits lingered in certain halls, drawn to anger, fear, and grief. She saw them once, faintly, as shimmerings at the corners of her vision. Kaelin noticed her awareness and frowned. "You see them," he said one evening, his voice quieter than usual. "They are not all evil," Aurelia said. "Some are lost, Some are just waiting. Kalen nodded slowly, staring into the hearth. I am both, he said finally. Lost and waiting. Aurelia felt a pang of sorrow at his words. It was not anger or malice in his tone, only pain. Deep, endless, and almost unbearable. She knew that the man he had been, the prince who had loved and been betrayed, had not died entirely. He was trapped beneath the weight of the curse, yet traces remained, flickers of warmth hidden under layers of ice and fury. She approached him slowly. Then let me help you remember, she said softly. Even the smallest memory can remind someone of who they are meant to be. Kylan did not respond, but he did not move away. He simply let her words settle between them, like snow landing softly on frozen ground. One night, while the moon hung low and silver over the Northlands, Aurelia found herself standing in the castle garden. The frost had formed intricate patterns on every branch and leaf like delicate lace spun from winter itself. She breathed in the sharp, clean air, letting the cold touch her cheeks and wake her senses. Kalen appeared beside her silently, his presence commanding yet oddly comforting. You are drawn to life, he said, almost as an observation, even in a place of death and frost. I am drawn to truth, she replied. Even when it hides behind fear or rage. He studied her, his amber eyes flickering with something ancient, something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. You do not fear me, he said. I do fear you, she admitted. But fear is different from hatred. And it is not fear that drives me, it is hope. He had not heard the word hope in decades, and he was unsure if he remembered how it felt. And yet, standing in the frost-kissed garden, he felt it stir, faint and fragile, like a spark struggling to ignite. As days passed, Aurelia and Kalen grew closer. Not in the way of lovers yet, but in understanding. Words became fewer as gestures and glances carried meaning. When she tended to the plants in the ice garden, he watched, curiosity mingling with caution. When he walked through the halls, she followed, not as a servant, but as someone who chose to be near him. And then came the first sign that the curse still had teeth, though its grip had loosened enough for her to glimpse the man beneath. Aurelia had found the relic, its power faintly pulsing beneath her fingers. She reached to touch it to see if it could awaken something within Kalen, if it could remind him of the humanity long buried beneath beastly rage. The moment she did, the room shivered. Shadows lengthened unnaturally along the walls, coiling like serpents, and the air grew heavy, scented with ice and smoke. Kalen's fur bristled. His ears twitched, nostrils flaring as the curse reacted to the relic. His amber eyes glowed brighter, almost golden, as if the beast within had sensed a rival force. A phantom form, darker and more terrifying than Kalen's own shadow, began to rise from the floor. Its shape was amorphous, yet every edge carried menace. Claws, fangs, and eyes that burned with hatred. You cannot, Kalen growled, his voice breaking as the phantom advanced. It is not yet time. I cannot be free. Aurelia stepped closer, refusing to flee. Then let me stand with you, she said. I do not fear you. Or it. The shadow hissed, and Kalen lashed out, claws striking the icy floor. Yet Aurelia moved with calm precision, holding the relic tightly, murmuring words she barely understood herself, but words of warmth and life. The shadow recoiled slightly as if the relic carried a force it could not touch. Kalen's breathing became ragged. Rage warred with fear. For a moment, he seemed poised to strike her, to destroy what he feared, and yet something stopped him. Something in her courage reminded him that he was not just a beast. You face this willingly? He asked, disbelief and awe lacing his voice. Yes, Aurelia said firmly, because I believe that even you can be saved. That even shadows cannot consume what is truly human. The phantom wavered, shrieking in a sound that echoed like breaking ice. Kalen's muscles trembled, his claws unsheathing and sheathing as his inner struggle raged. Finally, with a roar that shook the walls, he lunged, not at Aurelia, but at the shadow itself. The battle was both silent and loud, a dance of fury and magic, until the shadow dissipated, melting into nothingness, leaving only the cold air behind. Kalen fell to his knees, chest heaving, fur bristled, and eyes glowing faintly amber. Aurelia knelt beside him, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. "You are stronger than this curse," she said softly. "Stronger than the darkness that has held you for so long." But when he finally did, his voice was quieter, more human, tinged with awe. "And yet, I have never felt anything like this. Fear, yes. Anger, yes. But not this." Aurelia smiled faintly, brushing snow from his fur. "This is hope," she said. "And courage. And perhaps friendship." He looked at her, a mixture of confusion, longing, and something fragile that could only be called trust. For the first time, the Beast of the North realized that the world beyond his tower was not entirely cruel, that even in frost and shadow light could be found. And yet, as they sat there, the wind howled outside, carrying a warning Aurelia did not hear, but the castle did. Somewhere in the frozen mountains, far beyond their sight, something stirred, an ancient presence, aware that the beast was beginning to awaken, that the relic had touched him, and that the fragile bond between the healer and the cursed prince could change the course of fate itself. Kalen's amber eyes met hers, and for the first time in decades, he did not growl. He simply stared, aware that danger was not gone, only delayed. And Aurelia understood the truth. This castle, this land, and this beast were only the beginning. The shadows had yet to fully reveal themselves. But she would face them, because she had chosen to see the man behind the monster. And in the Northland's choice was the most dangerous magic of all. The wind outside the Northland's castle had grown sharper, carrying the promise of storms yet to come. Snow swirled like silver dust, and the trees bent beneath the weight of ice, groaning under the cold. Inside, the castle was quiet, yet silence in the halls of the beast was never truly safe. Shadows moved where the eye could not reach, and the remnants of Kalen's curse lingered like ghosts. Aurelia awoke to the soft glow of frost light streaming through the windows. Kalen was already awake, pacing the halls with his hands clenched at his sides, amber eyes blazing. The relic had been kept near him since the shadow incident days before, but the calm it brought was temporary. The curse stirred still, whispering reminders of his rage and failures, and each day it tested him more. "You move too little, healer," Kalen said when Aurelia entered the hall. His voice was rough, tired, yet tinged with something that had once been curiosity. "Do you not grow weary of watching a man wrestle with his own darkness?" "I am not merely watching," she said, folding her hands over the relic she carried. "I am helping you remember the man you once were. And, perhaps, the man you can still be." Kalen stopped, staring at her. The shadows beneath his eyes deepened as if the castle itself sighed in response. "Do you truly believe that is possible? That I can overcome centuries of hatred, betrayal, and blood?" Aurelia stepped closer, her gaze steady.
"I do, but only if you choose to fight it."
"Not for me, not for the kingdom, but for yourself." The beast's eyes flickered with uncertainty. His claws dug into the frozen stone beneath him, as though the ground itself reminded him of the weight of his past. Memories came unbidden. The laughter of a younger Kalen before betrayal. The warmth of hands long gone. The faces of those he had lost. Each memory was a chain binding him, a tether to the man he feared he would never be again. Days passed in a tense rhythm of study, walks through the frost garden and quiet conversations by the hearth. Aurelia learned more about Kalen's life before the curse, a prince of honor, beloved by his people, betrayed by those he trusted most. The sorceress who had cursed him had fed upon that betrayal, twisting his heart into something monstrous. "You are patient," Kalen said one evening, sitting by the fire. The orange glow touched his fur, highlighting the contours of his face, making him almost human in appearance. "I have grown used to people fleeing. Most come to conquer, or to steal, or to gawk. But you do not recoil. I do not fear what is broken, Aurelia said softly. I fear what is lost. Kaelin's amber eyes softened in a way Aurelia had only glimpsed once before. Perhaps, he said, voice quieter than the wind, there is more left of me than I believed. Somewhere, far beyond the mountains, the sorceress who had cursed Kaelin watched. Her eyes, cold as black ice, studied every move. She whispered to the shadows, and they stirred, hungry and restless. One night the castle trembled as a storm rose outside. The snow fell so heavily it hid the world beyond the towers, and lightning illuminated the ice in jagged flashes. Aurelia and Kaelin walked the halls, the relic between them, sensing that something deeper had awakened. It grows stronger, Kaelin muttered, his claws leaving faint scratches on the stone floor. The curse, it feeds on my anger, my fear. Even my hope. It hungers for me to surrender.
Aurelia reached out, placing a hand on his arm.
The touch was gentle, humanizing, and yet it carried strength. Then we must not surrender. You are not alone, Kaelin. I will not leave you to face it. The beast stopped, turning to her fully. His eyes searched hers, as if measuring the truth of her words against the walls of his own fear. I am dangerous, he said, not only to my enemies, but to you. If I lose control, even for a moment. You will not lose control, Aurelia said firmly. I will remind you of who you are, not the beast, not the curse. The man beneath it all. For hours they stayed in the library, the wind outside lashing against the frozen windows. Aurelia studied the relic, tracing the patterns of frost and sunlight etched upon it, while Kaelin sat near, his gaze flickering between her face and the pages of ancient books he could barely read. Each second they spent together, the distance between man and beast shrank, replaced by trust and fragile understanding. And yet, the darkness was never far. It came the next day as they explored a corridor leading to the castle's forgotten wing. Shadows gathered in corners where light could not reach, forming shapes that moved of their own accord. Aurelia tightened her grip on the relic, and Kaelin's fur bristled, ears flattening against his skull. The shadow emerged from the walls, a phantom far darker than any Kaelin had faced before. Its form was ever shifting, a mass of claws, fangs, and glowing red eyes that radiated malice. It hissed like ice cracking under pressure, and the cold deepened unnaturally around them. Kaelin stepped in front of Aurelia, stance protective, muscles coiled. It is not yet time, he growled. You cannot face this alone. I am not alone, she said firmly. We face it together. The shadow lunged a torrent of darkness and rage. Kaelin struck first, claws flashing. But the phantom was not so easily harmed. It shrieked, the sound reverberating through the stone walls like breaking ice, forcing Aurelia to cover her ears. The relic glowed faintly, a heartbeat of warmth in the freezing air, and she raised it toward the shadow. The phantom recoiled at the light, and Kaelin seized the moment, striking again with precision, his body moving with a feral grace that belied the man beneath. Aurelia chanted softly, her words weaving through the air like threads of warmth, slowing the shadow's movements, weakening it, binding it. For a moment, the shadow faltered. Kaelin's amber eyes met Aurelia's, and in that brief connection, something unspoken passed between them. A shared courage, a promise of trust, and the recognition that neither would face the darkness alone. But the shadow was cunning. With a scream that echoed like 1,000 storms, it lashed out, striking Kaelin's shoulder. He roared in pain, staggering back, and for the first time in days, his feral instincts fought to overtake him. The curse whispered in his mind, urging him to rage, to destroy, to embrace the darkness fully. No! Aurelia shouted, stepping forward, placing her hands on his chest. The warmth of her touch and the relic's power flowed into him, steadying him, anchoring him to the man he was beneath the beast. Remember who you are, Kaelin. Not the curse. Not the shadow. The man! Kaelin trembled, claws digging into the stone floor. His breath came in ragged bursts, eyes flickering between amber and gold. The shadow shrieked again, a sound of rage and fury, but he held his ground. You anchor me, Kalen said, voice breaking. Even when I am lost, you anchor me. Aurelia smiled faintly, though her heart pounded with fear. Then hold on, she whispered. We are stronger together than the darkness believes. With a final, desperate surge, Kalen struck at the shadow with all his might. The creature dissolved into smoke, shrieking one last time before vanishing completely. The hall was silent again, save for the ragged breathing of the two of them. Kalen sank to his knees, exhausted, fur damp with melted frost and sweat. Aurelia knelt beside him, hands still glowing faintly from the relic's warmth. You fought it, she said softly. You did not give in. Biolin's amber eyes softened, vulnerability breaking through the feral mask he wore for decades. I could not have done it without you, he admitted. I am not free, but perhaps I am beginning to remember what it is to be human. The moment hung between them, fragile as ice over a deep river. Both knew that this was only the beginning. The curse had tested him, but it had not surrendered. And the sorceress, watching from far beyond the mountains, would not be idle. You will face more, Aurelia said quietly. But you will not face them alone. Kalen looked at her, his gaze intense, filled with gratitude, fear, and a spark of something he had long thought dead, hope. And if I fail? Because even when you stumble, I will be here, and together we will face whatever comes next. He reached out slowly, trembling, and Aurelia placed her hand on his fur. For a heartbeat, the castle seemed to still, the shadows holding their breath. Kalen's massive body relaxed slightly under her touch, the tension of centuries loosening, if only a little. The wind outside howled, carrying the promise of storms and whispers of danger yet to come. But inside the castle, amidst frost and shadow, a fragile light burned, a light that neither beast nor curse could entirely extinguish. Yet, deep in the northern mountains, the sorceress's eyes glowed in the darkness. So, he begins to awaken, she whispered, and the healer dares to touch him. Very well. Let us see if their bond is strong enough to survive the night to come. Aurelia and Kalen did not hear her words. They only felt the weight of what had passed, the shadow that had tested them, and the unspoken truth that their journey together had only just begun. The beast of the north had faced the darkness and survived. But the greatest trials, the ones that would test his heart, his humanity, and the fragile bond he was forming with the healer were still waiting. And in the silence of the castle, both of them understood. The heart, even when chained by curse and shadow, could still find courage. If someone was willing to reach for it, the northern winds had grown colder, sharper, and more restless than ever. The snowstorm that had covered the Northlands for weeks seemed endless, a white curtain hiding the world beyond. Within the castle, Kalen moved through the halls like a shadow, every step echoing against the ice-cold stone. The warmth that Aurelia had brought with her touch had faded slightly, replaced by the weight of what was coming. The sorceress had grown impatient! From her dark tower beyond the frozen mountains, she whispered to the shadows, sending tendrils of black ice and malice into the world. The curse, which had only been partially held at bay, now gathered strength, feeding on Kalen's fear, regret, and the remnants of his fury. Aurelia knew they could not wait. Kalen, she said quietly, placing her hand on his arm. We cannot avoid it any longer. The shadows will not stop. You must face them. Your curse, your past, everything. Kalen's amber eyes glimmered in the faint torchlight. He shook his massive head, a low growl rumbling from his chest. I am not ready, he said. The darkness, it is too strong. If I fail, you... You will not fail, Aurelia interrupted, stepping closer. Not while we are together. You are stronger than the shadows. Stronger than this curse. You only need to remember who you are. Kalen looked at her, the depth of centuries of pain etched into his gaze. The beast roared low in his throat, tension in every muscle. Yet something in Aurelia's unwavering gaze anchored him. She had already seen the man beneath the fur and claws, had already touched the spark of hope hidden in him. Now it was time for him to claim it fully. Together they moved to the highest tower of the castle. The wind outside tore at the stone walls, howling like the cries of 1,000 lost souls. Frost spiraled along the windows, forming intricate patterns that shimmered in the pale moonlight. This was the place where the sorceress's magic would meet them, where Kaelin's curse would confront its origin. The air grew heavy as they stepped onto the tower balcony. The world beyond was a blur of white and shadow, mountains jagged beneath the storm, the horizon swallowed by swirling snow. And then, in the center of the storm, the sorceress appeared, her form cloaked in black ice, eyes glowing like shards of frozen night. "Kaelin," she hissed, her voice carried on the wind. "You have fought well, but you cannot escape me. Either you embrace the darkness fully as it was meant, or you are lost forever." Kaelin stepped forward, fur bristling, claws digging into the stone floor. "I am not yours," he growled, voice breaking like thunder over the mountains. "I will not let you define me." The sorceress laughed, a sound like cracking glaciers. Shadows erupted from the storm, twisting around Kaelin, each one a fragment of his own fear and rage. They reached for him, clawing at his mind, threatening to drag him back into the beast he had been for decades. Aurelia stepped beside him, clutching the relic tightly. "Remember," she called, her voice steady against the wind. "Remember who you are. The man inside, the prince, the heart that has not been destroyed. You are stronger than fear, stronger than hate, stronger than the curse itself." Kaelin faltered, the shadows writhing around him, and for a moment, he almost gave in. His claws lashed at the darkness, eyes glowing bright amber, then gold, the beast within fighting to reclaim what he had lost. The wind screamed, snow whipping against the balcony like knives. Aurelia reached out, placing her hands on his chest. Warmth flowed from her, from the relic, and from the courage she carried. "I believe in you," she said softly, yet her voice cut through the chaos like a sword. "I have always believed in you. Now believe in yourself." The shadows shrieked, lashing out, clawing at Kaelin, trying to pull him down. But he did not fight alone. He felt her strength, her hope, her unshakable faith, and slowly the man beneath the beast began to awaken fully. Memories of kindness, laughter, and love, forgotten faces, lost moments, choices once made, flooded him. The amber in his eyes burned brighter, the gold within glimmering like sunlight breaking through clouds. With a roar that shook the mountains, Kaelin unleashed himself, not in rage but in choice. His claws struck at the shadows, but with each blow he remembered who he was, transforming fury into purpose. The shadows faltered, hissed, and then began to dissipate, unable to resist the strength of a man who had reclaimed his heart. The sorceress screamed, rage echoing through the storm. "No! You cannot undo the curse! You belong to the darkness!" Kaelin turned to her, eyes burning with both fire and mercy. "I belong to no one but myself," he said. "And I choose life. I choose hope. I choose to be free." The sorceress's form shattered, black ice cracking and scattering into the storm. She disappeared into the wind, leaving only silence, broken only by the howl of the north wind and the steady breaths of Kaelin and Aurelia. Kaelin sank to his knees, chest heaving, exhaustion and relief mingling in his roar. Aurelia knelt beside him, placing her hand on his massive paw. "You did it," she whispered. "You are free." Kaelin's amber eyes, now fully lit with gold flecks, softened. "No," he said quietly, voice rough but human again. "We did it. You held me when I could not hold myself. I would still be lost without you." Aurelia smiled faintly, warmth blooming despite the cold. "Then let us leave the shadows behind," she said. The storm began to ease, snow falling gently as if the world itself were exhaling. The first rays of dawn broke over the mountains, painting the ice in pale gold. Kalen rose, taller, stronger, yet tempered by what he had endured. The beast within him was no longer chained, but the man had been reborn fully, scarred perhaps, but whole. They stood side by side on the balcony, the wind tugging at their cloaks, the relic glowing faintly in Aurelia's hands. "The Northlands are still wild," she said, "and magic never truly dies." But the greatest darkness has passed. Kalen nodded, amber gold eyes reflecting the sunrise. "And yet," he said, voice quiet but steady, "it will return. Perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but someday. And when it does, I will be ready. Not as a beast, not as a prince bound by fear, but as myself, with you." Aurelia reached for his hand. Their fingers intertwined, warm against fur and glove. "Then we will face it together," she said, her voice firm, filled with hope. "Always together." For a long moment they simply stood there, watching the sun climb above the mountains. The ice shimmered in the dawn light, reflecting their figures, the past and the promise of the future. The storm had passed, but the Northlands were still alive with magic. Yet for the first time in centuries, Kalen felt peace. Not because the land was safe, but because he had found someone who had seen the man beneath the beast and had refused to leave him. And Aurelia knew that their journey would continue, not as healer and cursed prince, not as fear and beast, but as equals, as companions, as two hearts that had found one another in a world of snow and shadow. Kalen bent his massive head slightly, resting it near her shoulder. "I do not know what tomorrow holds," he said softly, "but I know I will not face it alone. And that is enough." Aurelia leaned gently against him. "It is more than enough," she said. "It is everything." The wind carried the soft whisper of snow across the mountains, the Northlands stretching endlessly in white and shadow. Yet in the castle, in the heart of the man once called the Beast, warmth bloomed unshaken and eternal. The sun rose higher, scattering frost into sparkling dust. And for the first time in centuries, Kalen and Aurelia stepped into the dawn together, free of curse, free of shadow, and ready to face whatever the future might bring. Together. Somewhere in the distance, the mountains still held secrets, and the Northland still whispered of magic. But for now, for this moment, the beast of the North was gone, and a man whole and human knelt no more, but walked beside the one who had saved him. The story was not the end, but the beginning of something far greater. Hope, trust, and the quiet power of love that could endure even in the coldest, darkest lands.